Did you notice that I had a blurring beauty filter on my face for the first half of the episode?
Honestly, no, I didn't. You're just
Uh,
naturally, your skin is so good.
I was like, why the hell are my cheeks so smooth? And then I
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Deconstruction Zone. This is episode 82. Danny, how's it going?
It's going all right. It's cold.
It is cold.
I had a follow-up knee appointment with my doctor today, which is
Okay.
always weird when it's -4 degrees out and you haven't been able to stretch and your appointment's at 8 in the morning and they're trying to measure your flexibility. And I'm like, well, it's really
Mm.
not my fault actually in this case. But other than that, it's been pretty good.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. This is probably going to be quicker episode. We kind of are both lives are a little hectic right now, but we're going to just check in. But I wanted to start with a
Yeah.
story. This happened this week at school. I always open up this every class with a do now question. It's usually just a way to spark discussion and tries to lead in to what we're going to talk about. So
Okay.
I think on Wednesday, I asked my question was why do you think all social media platforms have a comment section, and what is the purpose of that and things like that. And I was trying to get them to talk about the fact that we all have a lot to say about almost any sort of media that we
Hmm.
engage with, and how that
Yeah.
adds meaning to it. I thought it was a cool question. This kid walks in and he goes, "Ms. Yell, I gotta be honest, it's a pretty shallow question." And I was like, oh, okay. he was like he was like, and honestly, I think it's pretty surface level. So I have a new question for the class. And I was like, okay. And he goes, which do you guys think is stronger, love or hate? And I was like, oh wow.
A real banger to replace yours.
I was like, you know what? At least that's not surface level. but
Did you have an answer for the question? Like, what would be your answer? Like, what was the best answer you heard from students?
Well, there's this one very quiet girl that doesn't talk, and she just very quietly was like, "I think it's hate," and I was like, "Oh, I'm so glad you're engaging. Talk about it." And she was like, "Hate's just really strong," and then that's all she said, and I was like, "All right." I was like,
Fair
um,
enough.
I said, I think what I said is, and then this kid started being like, "Well, God is love, and God is the strongest," and I work in a public school, so I was like, "Okay." I was like,
Yeah.
um, but what I said is, I said, I think that love is stronger, but I think that sometimes hate is louder
Oh,
or
yeah.
sticks with us. And then I told them a little bit about the idea of a schema and how some of us have a bucket in our brains that holds on to all of those mean comments you've ever heard, or the
Mm,
hate or the harsh comments. We hold on to that, but we don't make a bucket for all the love and affirmation we receive. We kind of let that ping off and forget about it. And so hate ends up feeling a lot stronger because that's what we hold on to and keep looking back to. And it was a pretty interesting
yeah.
conversation.
Yeah. I think that for a question that was pretty surface level, following up your surface level question, it does open up a really interesting level of conversation. Um, like you've heard this statement before, probably something like the boos are the loudest, or like your critics are the loudest, and the
Mhm.
idea that just because you hear the people complaining the most doesn't mean that's the main thrust of what people believe, which isn't the exact same question, but it does connect to the idea of what you're saying, like hate or anger or honestly just any sort of negative sticks with us more and ends up being louder. um Louder than anything. It is, like I said this before, this is our second time trying to start this, and I started with a story about me coaching basketball, weird interaction, and I won't get a ton into the story, but I will say that was pretty much the thrust of the whole thing.
Mm.
Someone in the middle of the game, the other coach asked me, "Does your wife even love you?" And I'll be honest with you, I didn't go to sleep till 2 in the morning last night because I just reran
Mm.
everything from the conversation from a third grade basketball game in my mind, because I was like, what did I do? And did I start that? Like, what was happening? But it's true. I think hate and negativity stick with us, and whether it's stick with us in good ways for the long term or short term, it's they do stick with us regardless and start to
Mm.
form us whether we want them to or not.
I mean, I think like obviously we're a deconstruction podcast, but I was even thinking of like I think the fact we say all the time like how can you keep the good and like get rid of like the BS, but I think the reason why this whole process ended up getting the name deconstruction is because like the first work you have to do is to start to unravel all the negative stuff because that's what originally sticks with you.
Yeah.
And I think like the
Yeah.
hope is as you sift through it, like then the good shines through and sticks with you. But it's hard to focus on that because you've almost like thrown that aside because you've been holding on to like all of the hurt and the bad.
Yeah. Yeah. That's good. Well, I do have a follow-up question on that, but I will say, would you entertain the idea of us this not being a deconstruction podcast and becoming a third grade basketball podcast? Should we just talk about
Absolutely.
third every week? No. So I'd be interested because I know this is a shorter episode. You and I have a lot, like life has gotten busy. I think that we're gonna have more time outside of January, but this January has been
Yeah.
hectic for the two of us. But I would be interested as you reflect back on these chronicled 82 weeks of deconstruction, but obviously like your whole journey, like what has been the thing that has stuck with you the most that maybe you were surprised by that was maybe more rooted than like pain or shame or hate? And is there anything that like stuck with you that was kind of a light or loving that you're reflecting back on, but maybe you don't always like immediately think about, but like when you kind of, because that's kind of the way it goes sometimes with positive things, as you said, like we don't immediately go to those. And so I'd be interested to hear like what is maybe the hardest you're willing to share and maybe the happiest or lightest moment you're willing to share from this journey.
Yeah, I'm gonna come to your question because I actually had a conversation that was basically like this just yesterday. I was talking to someone who had a very similar upbringing as me,
Okay.
and she was saying she was like I don't really believe any of this anymore. Like I'm agnostic. However, I remember certain like advice or lines that I wrote like from church that I like give as real advice today that feels crazy because I know the origin of it and I no longer associate with that. But I remember her example was like this is something I think Tim Keller said a lot. I don't know if it's from him originally, but he said, our greatest desire is to be fully known and fully loved, but our greatest fear is to be fully known and then like not met with love.
Yeah.
And I just like it's just crazy because I had this conversation yesterday where she was like, I kind of feel a little bit weird um giving people that advice, but at this because I no longer associate with the background, but I still think it holds true. And I even remember like I'm not going to go into details on this one, but I was giving someone relationship advice the other day and she was like, "Where did you hear that?" And I was like, "I think I heard that like growing up in church." And so
Okay.
it definitely is like I think that that is a real experience that some of us feel weird about like the origins of how we get some stuff that's like in our arsenal of wisdom in a sense. It's hard for me to pick something like the thing that has like shined the brightest. I feel or shone, I don't know. But
Shined?
shined, shone, I don't know.
Shoned?
Shoned. But um I honestly feel like that's something that I want to keep thinking about because I feel like it's maybe not necessarily like one thing is coming to mind of like this has stayed like the truest and brightest thing other than I guess just like the truth of like love and inclusion and sacrifice are always going to be compelling and are always going to be good, and those are like
Yeah.
things that are very true of Christianity that it's okay to be like, yeah, that's where even if you don't consider yourself a Christian anymore to be like I like those truths and those values came to me from my upbringing, and I think that's like good and beautiful.
Hmm. Yeah.
I know
I dig
that's
that.
not a perfect answer, but like that's kind of where I'm at.
I think that is what makes it a perfect answer. If it's where you're at, then it's the right answer to give. So I dig it.
But like, I mean, I'm sure you have feelings like that too of things that have stuck with you from places that you no longer really associate with.
Yeah. I mean, I think about the most easy like analogy of this is I think about like sometimes when I'm preaching, like the language I want to use is language that like is really familiar and comfortable to me, but maybe not like exactly the way I would say it. Or like um or if I say, even like you quoting Tim Keller, like if I quoted certain people at the well, like it would trigger those people, even if like their statements are really, really positive. I think that's the most interesting thing about this whole journey of deconstruction is like, and I'm a pretty, I think I'm accountability culture guy. I'm not a huge cancel culture person. So it's like
Mm,
throwing out everybody that like the conservative authors that I'm like, I don't agree with you because of certain things. Throwing them all out is kind of crazy to me because it's like they did have nuggets of wisdom, even if it was like the whole package wasn't like everything I loved it. And same thing with like worship music. People like we don't sing Bethel or Hillsong anymore because of X, Y, or Z thing. It's like I don't know that we throw the baby and the bathwater out together. Um, so I don't know. It's like it is an interesting journey, and I think it's what makes deconstruction. And you could probably speak to this more uh, specifically than I could, but I think it's what makes deconstruction hard is because when you're in it, it feels very all or nothing because the stakes feel really high. But then I think everyone on the outside, whether they're agnostic, atheist, deconstructed, whatever, or religious, they also their camps are like it's all or nothing, and it's just a weird experience to be in the midst of it because um just because you don't know where to stand because everyone's like telling you it's all or nothing or something and then you're just like what do I do, you know?
I mean, 100%. And I was even thinking about back when I was in like high school, there was um a Babylon Bee article, and it was like the idea was like something of like atheist neighbor runs over to like Christian neighbor's house to borrow some morality for his argument. Then it was like so classic Babylon Bee. And I remember I think we read it in high school, and my teacher was like, this is the problem is like people who aren't like fully aligned with us want to take some of our values, but like you can't just want. And so it's kind of fun to then feel like you became one of the people that the fundamentalists like resent and think like, no, if you left, you can't have any of it. And it's like, wouldn't you rather have someone take like some beautiful things out of what you were creating than nothing at all? Or you want to gatekeep all of it for the sake of like converting more fundamentalists?
Yeah, Christians are funny, fundamentalists especially because they think they've cornered the market on morality when it's like obviously
Right.
you haven't. And so it's like the idea that like it's even yours to gatekeep is an odd experience and thing to watch in real time, you know?
I mean, for sure. But like, I think it is hard because it's hard when you remember language like that and you're now on the other side because you're like,
Yeah.
do I even have the right to this? Like, kind of thing. When in reality, I don't think in Jesus' teachings, if someone was ever like, man, I loved this part of the Sermon on the Mount and not this, he was like, then don't take any of it. Like, I'm sure he was just
Right,
like,
right,
okay, like, I wish he would have loved all of it, but I'm glad that you like the Beatitudes. Like, something like that. You know what I'm saying?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think so. With this one, we got to wind down because I know you got somewhere to be here in a little bit. But here's what I would say: this isn't technically going to be a two-parter because it's going to drop tomorrow, Tuesday. But I would be interested. I think we should have a further conversation on the topic of morality. I think it'd be really interesting to talk a
Yeah.
little bit about like the overlap and the Venn diagram of like how those things are made, and does anyone have a claim to certain things, or is it really all up for grab, and how much of it is choose your own adventure and how much of it is like it needs to stay, you know? Like I'd be interested to explore that a little more, especially from your perspective.
I dig that. And because this is coming out tomorrow, like if you're listening,
Yeah.
if you listen in time, like email us your thoughts about maybe morality or what we've been talking about, because this is like somewhat of a two-parter. And so hopefully people can like in real time engage the discussion with us. And so we're ready to go for next week because I think that's a big discussion for sure.
Yeah, and let's put some stuff on Instagram too this week, and we'll
For
see if
sure.
anyone has stuff that we can like throw in there. But because we're jammed for time, we're not going to do a recommendation station this week. But um, why don't you and your dog send us out, and then we'll be back here next week to have a longer discussion on morality.
Yeah, the dogs are just very excited to talk about morality so that they're
I think so.
pitching in. Sorry if that was jarring in anyone's headphones. Um, all right. Well, everybody, thanks for listening. Remember to send questions or comments about morality this week. And as always, embrace the journey. We'll get there.
We did it.